Hello, my name is Emma Marnie. I'm the CEO of Women's Health and Wellbeing Barwon Southwest. I'm here today to discuss a little women and money. As part of the Women's Health Week celebration and calendar of events happening across the Geelong region. So it's great to be part of Women's Health Week. I'd like to acknowledge Jean Hales for the inspiration, the City of Greater Geelong and G21 for partnering in this. Before I leap in, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I stand today, and I'm in Warrnambool, so that's the Peak Wurrung people of Eastern Maar Nation. May I also acknowledge all elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the traditional custodians, the connection to land, to country, to culture of all Aboriginal clans across this region and wherever you might be watching this live recording. On a brief note, I would also like to acknowledge the global Black Lives Matter movement. COVID-19 has certainly shone a light on some of the inequalities in our world and in our communities, and it's been a really interesting time to start to talk about and think about the Black Lives Matter movement and deaths in custody in Australia. So may I also acknowledge that. Before I leap into this small discussion around women and money, I also want to, I guess it's also acknowledge that we're living in a really amazing time, that we're living in and living through a global pandemic, something beyond most of our experience. So I really want to acknowledge that most of us are in lockdown. I'm in my workplace this morning, but I think I'm at about week 24 working from home, and I'm incredibly lucky. While I acknowledge that the experience of this COVID-19 pandemic is difficult, and as part of this acknowledgement and celebration of women's health and talking about and thinking about that, is important to acknowledge that the pandemic has a significant impact on health. And I think we're having more and more of a discussion around the impact, particularly of isolation. So I wanted to start with a very small summary of what Women's Health and Wellbeing Barwon Southwest is. And then today I'm going to speak about women and money. I'm going to explain why I'm talking about that in the context of a focus on health, on women's health this week. I guess a little bit of talking about that in the context of COVID-19. And then I'm going to wrap with some recommendations about, I guess, how do we go forward and what can you do? One thing I'm going to be clear about is this will be informal, so it's nothing. I've got a couple of notes here in front of me in case I get lost, but it's not, the aim isn't for this to be polished or professional. I'm sort of trying to feel like I'm sitting with you and chatting with you. I've had to stand because I couldn't quite get the logistics to work, and as I shared, I'm in my office and there's a meeting room in the back, so you know it's probably not quite like we're sipping a cup of tea together, but I hope you do. I hope you make a cup of tea and we can sit together for a few minutes. And I guess it's one of those moments where we're trying to connect at a time of isolation and lockdown. So we've got creative, the group of us this week, in making these videos and sharing a message with you all. So Women's Health and Wellbeing Barwon Southwest. So we are a regional organisation, Geelong to the border. We're the only health promotion organisation that covers that whole region and focuses on women. So we grew out of the women's movement, and certainly at a state level, great advocates like Joan Kerner were part of establishing this sector. We grow out of a recognition that women and men's lives are different, and that there's still work to be done to focus on and improve women's health and women's lives, and to promote equality between women and men. one thing I'd like to acknowledge is that we recognise women and all people who define themselves as a woman, recognise themselves as a woman. So we are a health promotion organisation. When you're at a Sunday afternoon barbecue and somebody asks you what you do and you say health promotion, they sort of smile and walk away. Not many people get what we do. But essentially our job is to actually focus on the things that create health. So rather than focusing on disease, we want to focus on the things that create health. And our job is to advocate, is to do training, is to work in workplaces and schools and sporting clubs, to build policies and local laws sort of around how we can recognise and foster health. And our particular focus is on women's health. So these things that cause health are sometimes described as the determinants of health. But for today, I'm just going to call them the things that create health, or they can create ill health. So our job is to think about those things that create health and try and build them up. And some of the things that create health, and as soon as I list a couple, I'm sure they'll make sense, is having a job creates health. Having money, having a home, having an education, having access to services, all those things create health. So as a women's health organisation, we want to really foster those things and grow those things. As an organisation, we focus on a couple of key priorities, and we work out what those priorities are from looking at the data and understanding the picture at a state and local level. So as an organisation, our key focus is on promoting gender equality, on creating a community that is more equal between women and men. We also focus on the prevention of violence against women before it occurs, which is really fundamentally addressing this gender inequality. We also focus on the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women. So access to services, access to choice, to an understanding around how women's bodies are seen, how we understand sex and intimacy, safety and consent, things like that. So in the spirit of Women's Health Week and thinking about women's health and wellbeing, Barwon Southwest, what a long name. I wanted to think about, I wanted to welcome an idea that what creates health is more than individuals' choices. So sometimes we have a notion that health is created by the things that you do alone. And certainly there are lots of things that can contribute to feeling healthy. So being connected, being physically active helps to keep you well. And certainly through COVID, we're learning about that. Also, living free from violence and living free from discrimination is a really strong cause or determinant of health. So living safely. So in Australia, globally, but the stats for Australia is 1 in 3 women experience physical violence from an intimate partner, 1 in 5 sexual violence. So this ability to live free from violence isn't shared by all. So I want to really be clear as I start to talk about money that we're talking about the things that are beyond individual choices that shape health, and I guess in a way an extension of that shape opportunity. And I want to mention just briefly when we talk about living free from discrimination, that is about welcoming diversity, valuing diversity, celebrating diversity, and striving for equality. And so I think it's important to think about those things that shape health. So, to the heart of my small talk today, I'm talking about women and money. So, one of the things that I might have mentioned already is that having a job, having stability of income, having the ability for your bills to come in and you have the money to pay it, shapes your health, and it certainly profoundly shapes your mental health and well-being. So in this week where we're talking about health, I wanted to talk about money and how women's experience of money is shaped by much more than their individual choices. So I don't want to, for a moment, say this is about women not making good choices about money. I want to talk about those things that are bigger, that impact on, and they can either help or hinder women's ability to have money and have enough money to live freely and comfortably. What I'm going to speak to now is comes from a piece of work conducted by Economic Security for Women. It was a white paper. They've republished it this year. And it's identified key things that get in the way or certainly shape women's ability to make money and make enough money to be described as economically secure. So that ability to have a stable income and be pretty confident you can pay the bills and pay for those things that come up in our regular day-to-day lives. Just a quick mouthful of water. I'm trying ambitiously to do this in one take. So let's see how we go. I think I mentioned that my hope is to make this a little less formal, so ride with me if it's a little unpolished. So the things that are shaping women's ability to have enough money to live, there are many. One of them is childcare. So women needing to leave their jobs to have a child, and how frequently women do not return to that same role or that same number of days or to that same level of income. So the impact of having a child, having a lifelong impact on women's earnings. That's one of the things that shapes women's lives and shapes women's financial situation, the money women live on. I guess what I want to talk about is more women are living with less money, more women live in poverty. Several older women, there's a growing community of women who are moving towards retirement alone, without the ownership of their own home, and really in a space where they're really insecure financially. And probably also their health is quite vulnerable because they don't have secure home, they don't have a steady income or enough to live. So it's important to think about understanding money and what's shaping women's access to money. The other thing that comes, there's a list of things that are shaping, helping or hindering women's access to money. The next on my list is unpaid care roles. So there's certainly the hours of unseen and unrecognised and unpaid care, so of a child over the years. You know, the idea that we have 4 weeks annual leave a year and there's 10 weeks of school holidays. So how is somebody carrying that load? Similarly with aging parents or family members, it's mostly women that take up those roles, and it impacts on the amount of money women can earn because they're unpaid roles, so they need to be out of their paid job to fulfill that role. So over the years of working less and doing more of those care roles, they end up with less money in the bank. They have less money week to week. A second companion to this is the domestic work, and this is again a very unseen, and it's just a carried load for women. So the work of maintaining the house, of doing housework, the work of that. So in Victoria there's a piece of research that came up with a figure of $205 billion being the cost in Victoria for women's unpaid work, and that's the domestic work and the caring work. This amazing contribution that goes unrecognised and goes unpaid. Something I would add to that, and it's become more of a discussion in recent times, is this idea of a mental load. A mental load is somewhere in between those two significant roles. It's the role of caring and the role of maintaining a house. The mental load is the organising, the planning, the preparing, the packing lunches, the knowing when the next bill is due, that knowing when the car is serviced. It's this whole other mental load that there's a recognition that women carry this other load. And I guess this recognition comes out of, so in some great ways, an ability or hope to understand and share the load. And I think the other part is because, and certainly COVID is demonstrating this, that women are having The rates of women living with anxiety and depression are growing. So we're trying to understand that. And one of these things is the load that women carry, the caring, the housework, and this unseen planning, tending, minding, um, coordinating logistics stuff. That there's a cost to those things. There's a cost in the hours available to work. It's also a cost to often to women's own mental health and well-being. What else helps and hinders women's money? So their financial situation, the amount of money they can make and they can save and have in their lives to get by. So another thing is that women's work is not as well paid. We know that. So health, education, care roles, work in the early years, all are paid less. All of the sectors that are made up largely of women are paid less. I think it's really important to wonder why. Why are all of these areas where it's mostly women's work, where it sort of looks a bit like the caring work, is paid less? And then in other sectors, women are, so when you look more broadly, women are still earning less. 15 to 20% less, depending on different sectors. Women are earning less. They're in less of the senior roles. So women's work, paid work, is paid less. And then in the broader workforce, their earnings are less. I think there's some really important questions there. Next, superannuation. So if you think about this over a lifetime, you think about women taking years out to have children, you think about women taking time to work part-time because to manage that, whether it's children or caring for other people in their community. It means at the end of their working life, some women have a zero super balance, and most women have about 50% of men's super balance in retirement. That's sort of what I touched on before. There's this growing community of older women who are retiring with no savings. So sort of going full circle, when I started, I was talking about COVID and the impact of COVID at this time. And COVID, like I mentioned actually, when I spoke of Black Lives Matter, COVID has shown us the inequalities in our world. Those that are most vulnerable are carrying the bigger load. There's been a lot of discussion around women's experience in COVID. So they're right at the front line. Those professions I spoke about that are paid less, nurses, teachers, care workers, they're right at the front line. They're most vulnerable to the illness. They're also in these workforces that are less secure, less well paid, and more casual and short-term contracts. So women are right at the front line, but they're losing more jobs than men. And so women are actually carrying a bigger load. So there's certainly some emerging research around women's poorer mental health through this time. And I think it's really interesting to put that together with what I was just speaking around the load on women, the domestic, caring, mental load, as well as homeschooling through this period has been extraordinary. And that's the emerging research is saying women are carrying that load. And we've got a growing understanding that women's mental health at a population level, women are struggling. When you look at the load, I mean, homeschooling is like a double shift. Somehow women, and for certainly not for a moment am I saying that men are not contributing to this load or being part of this work. But what we know is that for now, women are carrying the bigger load. And my role here today is to speak about women's experience. So what can we do? I'm nearly closed. What can we do? So I, as the CEO of Women's Health and Wellbeing Barwon Southwest, as an organisation with a commitment to working through health promotion to improve women's lives, I can be part of advocating for sectors that women work in to get the pay increments in the next few years. So instead of the increments being universal through Fair Work, maybe they could be skewed towards health and education, those that are carrying the load in this time of the pandemic, but actually continue to be underpaid. Perhaps we can look at future wage increases, which will cost nothing to the broader sector. It's just tilting it more towards that sector to make it a level playing field. I can be part of a state and a national push towards free or affordable or accessible childcare. a recognition that that has a profound impact on women's lifelong earnings. We can look at and make recommendations around superannuation contributions continuing when women step out of the workforce, so that when they get to the end of their life, they're not living in poverty. And in closing, what can you do? I would recommend you talk about this, particularly I would really recommend that women speak of this, that we talk about how we're in this together. And this is where I put a call out to the men. This is not about instead of the men or good and bad men. This is about how do we do better together. I would suggest this inequality doesn't necessarily work for men either. And particularly when you're talking about the care responsibilities. How about men took up some of the flexibility? How about the men were some of the ones that went home on the days where children were sick and needed care? How do we share that load so that men have the chance to have a richer, deeper, perhaps, connection with their children or emotional life? Perhaps some of those challenging or limited ideas about how women and men behave and share the load can actually give us all more. So let's talk about it. Let's share the load. So really, let's talk about managing the house, managing the mental load, managing the care. Let's talk about that more with a hope to sharing the load and making it clear that rather than individuals in relationships battling this out, perhaps we can make structural change that lightens the load or shares the load. One of the other things I think that I would encourage women to think about, and I don't see this as the biggest problem, while I do think there's value in understanding your own money skills and how to manage money, how to budget money. So this is not the heart of what I'm talking about, but there's power in knowledge and there's power in understanding. So certainly Wire, women's information, they have a website, they have a phone number. Please jump online and check them out. They also offer short courses and workshops in financial literacy. I really encourage you to understand more about money, feel like and understand the structures, be an advocate too, speak up as well. I'd also encourage you to take a look at our website. So it's womenshealthbsw.org.au. We've got a page there with COVID information, so supports and information and services. We've also got some links to discussions. So